Welcome to the tutorial. In this video, I'll be showing you how to make advanced 3D lighting in Gdevelop. Now, if you want to learn how to make some more basic 3D lighting, you can go into my earlier video of 3D lighting in Gdevelop. I have a video on more basic 3D lighting, but we're going to get into some more advanced features here. Now, the basic 3D lighting that we used earlier was using the native Gdevelop 3D features. Basically, we use no extensions in that. That could all be made without extensions. But for the advanced, we're going to actually use an extension. And this extension is called With3JS. It's made by Pandako. Many of you may know him already. He's a great extension maker. Make sure to go subscribe to his channel. I'll have a link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to Pandako, the creator. But I'm going to go and add this extension to Gdevelop. So let's go into our project manager in the top left corner. Then go into search for new extensions. I'm going to type in with, and you should already see With3JS pop up by Pandako. And here we have it. This is actually not the most recent version, I believe. It may or may not be the most recent version, but it's recent enough where we can have the 3D lighting. So now you want to click install into project and close that out. So now that we have With3.js, the first thing we want to always do is actually create a scene. And I'm going to be going quite fast here. Because in terms of Pandako, I have another tutorial on how to basically use Pandako. You can check that out as well. I should have a card here for this as well. But I'm going to start adding. So first of all, we're going to add condition here. Other conditions, then go into scenes. And then at the beginning of the scene, and click OK. And then add an action. Go into other actions. And now you should see With3JS as a tab. And I'm going to click into 3D scene. 3D scene here. And I'm going to create a 3D scene. This is what you always want to do whenever you start a project with this extension. And of course, I recommend that you learn how to use the extension first. But for the background color, it's simple. I'm going to set this as black. And for, well, not actually, yeah, let's set it as black. That's fine. And the background image, we're not going to use background image. The ambient light color, I'm actually going to start it off as white. Round white. It's not going to be exactly white, but it's going to be grayish. Fog, we don't want any fog, so I'm just going to put these parentheses. And it doesn't matter what we put here now because we already have defined that we want no fog. The projection scale just controls how far away objects look. It's just best to keep this as 1. And the view mode that we're going to be using is top down because we're going to be converting a top down scene, top-down playing field to a 3D scene. Now I'm going to click OK. Once again, I'm going to be moving quite fast in terms of creating this, because the next one we want to do is actually create a player that can move around first. I'm going to be moving very fast here because I have a tutorial on this already. Please go check that out. But I'm going to add a sprite first of all, and this is going to be called player. And I'm going to add an animation, and I already have sprites that I use for this. All you have to do is go into Piscal. It's built into Gdevelop. Mine is currently broken. But all you have to do is go into resize, make sure this is 32 by 32, and then color the whole thing whatever color you want. And you can save it there. So, but I already have sprites ready for things like this since I make a lot of projects like this. So I'm just going to go into where I have it in my tutorials. And I'm going to just make a blue cube as the player. And the behavior that I'm going to want to add to this, I'm going to add a behavior. If I scroll down, I'm going to put linked 3D camera. And of course, if you've used the extension before, we need this in order to be able to see from an object. And all of this can stay checked off. We don't want any of this to be unchecked. I'm going to hit apply, and I'm going to drag this player onto the scene. The next thing we're going to do is add some ground, and the ground is actually going to be a tile sprite because we're going to be changing this tile sprite into a 3D plane. So I'm going to click into tile sprite, then I'm going to call this ground, and once again I'm going to select another image, choose a file, and I'm just going to click just this brown right here, this brown color. Once again, doesn't matter what this is. Make sure the default width and height match what you set in the editor. I'm going to go into behaviors. I'm going to scroll down until I find 3D plane projection from tile sprite. Everything seems fine right here. Everything is fine. We want to keep everything the same. Hide the 2D object and hit apply. Now, of course, let's see. Let's drag this out. I'm going to actually activate the grid. I'm going to show grid by clicking up here. And I'm going to go stretch this out across the entire field. And of course, you'll see that right now we have an issue. My ground is going over the player. And that's because the player's Z order is lower than the ground. So I'm going to set the ground Z order as 1. I'm going to set the player Z order. I'm going to click into the player and set it as 10. And I'm going to drag this out now. And if I preview, let's see if we can see anything. And you'll see that we have to add an object. I always forget this because this is newly added, but you have to add an object that enables with Three.js. It's very easy to get since the new update has happened. So all we're going to do is go into our new object and put enable with Three.js. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to add anything to it. Just hit apply. And now when I preview, I should see an actual 3D scene. And as you can see, it's a 3D scene. Now you can't really tell it's 3D because I can't move. So I'm going to quickly add some movement. Once again, I'm going to be moving very fast. I'm not going to be explaining too much because I've already made a tutorial on this that you can check out called 3D in Gdevelop. It's one of my most recent videos. But go ahead and check that out first so you can easily be able to make things like this. Now, of course, I'm going to just quickly go through this. I'm going to go to my conditions and quickly add some movement. So I'm going to actually speed this part up of me adding the movement, and you can copy along after. I'm going to speed this part up. So here we have it. We have some basic movement code, and you can take a look at this. I'm going to click into this. I'm going to, of course, I always do a little bit of explaining, but basically all I'm doing is putting a key press, and for forward and backwards, I'm basically just adding a force to the player depending on his angle using this condition. I use that for forward and backwards, and for left and right, all I do is just rotate it based on a key press. But of course, I went over this many times in my previous tutorial, so I didn't want to waste anyone's time going over that all over again. But I do want to first preview to make sure everything is working. And if I use my keys, it's hard to really tell that anything's moving, but you can probably tell a little bit. But it's kind of hard to tell that anything's moving because we have no other objects in the scene. So I'm going to add an object to the scene, and I'm going to have this as a block. So the first thing we're going to do is add a tile sprite. Now, when it comes to making boxes in Gdevelop, there are two ways to make boxes with Three.js anyway. So you have the first way I'm going to show you is the tile sprite way, and this one is kind of better for performance. This is better for performance. So I'm going to click into, not this, it's the default 3D box that Gdevelop has. So I'm going to delete this. But I'm going to add a new object, and it's going to be a tile sprite. And I'm going to just call this box _1. I'm going to select an image that I have, and I'm just going to choose this block right here. Once again, it doesn't matter how it is. And I'm going to click into behaviors and add behavior. Now if I scroll down, with Three.js has something called 3D box projection from tile sprite. Basically, it changes a box, well, it changes a tile sprite into a 6-face box. And here we have a few settings, and the most important setting in here, because the rest of these are not really useful in our case, but the most important setting here is the depth, and that basically controls the height of the box. And since we have a width and length of 32, since we're speaking in 3D senses, we want to also set the height to equal 32 so everything can be even. So I'm going to now drag this onto the scene, and I'm going to set the Z order as 16 because we want it to be above the ground. So I'm going to preview this. And if I look at my scene now I can move around using the arrow keys. Well, not arrow keys, WASD. And I can actually look around and look at this box. I can tell that it actually has all of its sides. So this is good that the box actually has the sides. And of course, another way to add a box, I'm going to add new objects. And you'll see that we have a 3D box experimental. And all you have to do in here is select all of the images. Select an image that you want for each side. So I'm going to go do that real fast. And I'm going to use a different color so that we can tell what it is. I'm going to use a yellow cube for this. And I'm going to just put this yellow cube in all of the faces. And you can set these to different faces. That's the good thing about using this 3D box instead of the tile sprite, because now you can set individual faces. So this is very good. This is very, very good. And I'm going to show you, the reason why I'm doing this is because the lighting, I want to show you that the lighting works for not only the ones from a tile sprite, but the lighting works for the tile sprite boxes and the just regular boxes. So I'm going to just rename this quickly to box _2. So now we're finally going to get into the actual lighting, which you've all been waiting for. Now when it comes to this lighting, once again, it's much better. But first we're going to create a light object. Now I'm going to go into Piscal. Of course, you can create your object first and then go into Piscal. But you want to create a sprite object first if you're going to use Piscal. So I'm going to actually add a new object. Click into sprite. And I'm going to call this object light _1 because there's different types of lights. And I'm going to go into my pixel. I'm going to color this light. It's going to be white. And I'm going to actually draw a line around the middle. This, of course, not exactly the middle, but I'm making sure that you all know that it's going in this direction. When you make a light, in terms of this extension, this is the default direction of where the light is going. It's going to the right. And this makes it easier. It's important to draw a reference like this on your sprite so you know where the light is going when you start rotating the object. This is for directional lights anyway. And I'm going to export this quickly. I'm going to download it. And I'm actually just going to save in my test sprites and just call it light. It doesn't really matter what it is. So I'm going to go back into my Gdevelop and I'm going to add sprite. And I'm going to add my light. And then I'm going to go into behaviors and add a behavior. Now if I scroll down, you should see linked 3D lights. Now you'll see also a warning symbol. It says 3D lights are highly loaded. That means that they have a toll on the performance, which means if you add a lot of these lights, your game can possibly lag, especially if you don't have a really fast computer. So if you're making a 3D game, make sure to not add too many of these 3D lights. But okay, you'll see we have some of these. We have some parameters that we can fill out. We have the color of the light. Now, of course, the best color of the light most of the time, of course, it all depends on your game, but generally you want to use a white light. You want to use a white light generally. Of course, you may want to capture a different color, but generally white lights are what most people are trying to use. So we're going to keep this the same. Feel free to edit if you want. And the distance is pretty obvious. The distance is simply how far does the light reach. Now for my testing, the distance is a little bit crazy. Like sometimes you'll set a low distance and you'll still see the light illuminating a certain area. And you set for points, and for points and spotlights, 0 means it has no limit. So 0 means it has infinity. But right now we're using a directional light. So I'm going to set the distance as 100 blocks or 100 pixels. I believe it's measuring pixels. And now we have intensity. Intensity is pretty self-explanatory. It explains how bright the light is. If you have a low intensity, the light won't be that bright. If you have a high intensity, the light will be very bright. Simple as that. So I'm going to actually keep the intensity as 1 for now, just to see how that looks. And I'm going to, everything else we don't have to really worry about. The tilt, pretty obvious. It tilts the light in like almost an upwards direction. Because normally we rotate, that's only rotating it horizontally. But when you tilt it, it kind of moves vertically. And spot angle and spot penumbra, these do not need to be used right now. As you can see, it says they're only for spotlights. Right now we're using a directional light, so we don't have to worry about those. So I'm going to hit apply. Now, if I drag this onto the scene, and let's say I zoom up here, and I put this light in front of this box right here. Now, if I preview this scene, nothing will really look like it has changed at all. Nothing will look like it has changed. And I think I forgot to set my depth of this box right here. But you'll see that nothing has really changed. And there's a reason why almost nothing has changed. And the reason is, I'm going to go back into the events. And you'll see if I click into this first condition, well, this first action here, you'll see that my ambient light color is like nearly white. That means it's like bright. And the ambient light color is very important. This basically kind of sets the light of the sky. If you have a dark color like black, that's how the lighting will be in the scene. You won't be able to see anything because that's the light color. But if you have white, that basically means the whole scene is already lit up. So when you're trying to use lights, make sure you set your ambient light color as something that's really dark. Or in my case, I'll just set it as completely black. So make sure you just set it as a really dark color. Now, if I preview now, you'll see that you can barely see anything. You can barely see anything. Now, when it comes to these directional lights, it covers a lot of distance. I can see if I go back into my scene, you'll see that even though the light is only in front of this block, it's still illuminating this other block as well. And that's why the distance, it has a lot of area. Now, let's see if I can change this light. Now, the distance, like I said, it works kind of weirdly. Let's see what happens if I set the distance at 1 on this directional light. And then I see what happens. You see that everything is still lit up. That's why I told you the distance doesn't really matter too much when it comes to this extension. The distance, I'm not sure if it's supposed to work that way or is it broken. But what you see about the directional light is I can only see one face of the block. And the reason why is because I've only had this light facing in front of the block. It's not facing in any other directions. Now, if I can actually change it. Let's say I want to light up the corner of this black block right here. If I want to light up the corner, I can quite literally rotate it. And once again, pay attention to the arrow, because that's why I made an arrow here, so you can see where it is. This is showing, and let me turn off the grid so I can move freely. This is where the light's facing now. So if I preview, you should now be able to see the corner of this block. Now, if I look at here, now I can see more of this block corner. And if I look at this block, let's see if I can see this block corner as well. I can also see this block's corner. So when you have a light facing like this, basically you can kind of almost count it as like the sun almost, because it's covering the whole area. It's quite literally covering the whole area. So that's a directional light. That's how you use directional lights. Now we're going to get into the second light, which is called the point light. So I'm going to add another sprite, and I'm going to call this light _2. Once again, it doesn't matter what the name is. I'm going to add an animation, and I'm going to go back to the light object. Once again, now the arrow doesn't matter because we're actually using a different light. The arrow doesn't really matter now. I'm going to add a new length 3D light. And this one, if I go down into the type, now I want to click point light. And point lights are kind of like on the ground. They're like a spot on the ground. That's what they cover. They cover a specific area on the ground. That's what they illuminate. So once again, the distance is important for these point lights, because if I set it as 0, you see the whole ground is lit up. So I'm going to start off as 0 first. We're going to actually use a different color of light. I'm going to use like a yellowish light now, just to show you how that looks. And once again, spot angle doesn't matter. Spot penumbra also doesn't matter. And the tilt doesn't really matter much for point lights. But you can test it out if you want to. But from my experience, it doesn't really change too much. So I'm going to delete this directional light, and I'm going to drag this onto the scene. And I'm going to put it, well, it doesn't really matter because we said it's an infinite distance, so I'm just going to put it anywhere. And you'll see that we have a lot more of the ground lit up now. I can see much more of the ground, but you'll see that it's most intense where I actually place the light. And these point lights, they'll basically light up most of the model. As you can see, this part right here, you can't really see this part. But this yellow, I can still see this yellow, but you can't see the back of it. So point lights are very good for like ground lighting, and it gives it kind of a more realistic feel. I'm going to double click into the lights, and I'm going to actually change the intensity to 10 and see how that looks. And let's see how much that changes. Now if I change the intensity, that's making it much brighter, and it's actually illuminating more of the ground. So not only is it about distance, it's about the intensity of it. And of course, if you want to light up these areas, you'll see that my intensity didn't really change these areas. These areas are still dark. Like, you can tell that they're there, but they're still really dark. So I placed the point light behind it. You should now see that I cannot see the front faces, but now I can see more of the back faces. So that's how these point lights work. The point lights are mainly for illuminating the ground. As you see, these point lights are very good for having a realistic type feeling of it. Once again, if you want to light up the whole area, you would set a really high intensity. But in our case, we don't need that. Now, finally, in my opinion, what's the best light is the spotlight. So I'm going to add a new object. And once again, there's going to be a sprite. I'm going to call it light _3. Add an animation. Add the same sprite that we used before. I'm going to click into behaviors. Add a new behavior. And I'm going to go into where it says, once again, link 3D light. Now, if I scroll down, you'll see that we have a spotlight now. And now we can use all of the parameters, because you'll see that we have spot angle and we have spot penumbra. I'm going to explain what those are. Now, of course, the distance is still really the same thing as the point of spotlights. The intensity is still the same. Now, when it comes to spot angle, you're quite literally changing the angle of which the light is facing. And I'm going to try to test a few things out, because it's kind of hard, even for me, it's really hard for me to visualize it. It's hard for almost anyone to try to visualize how it's going to move the light by changing this. Now, spot penumbra, what I believe this is kind of changing the gradient of the light. Because when you have a light, you'll see that the farther you get away from the light, it kind of gets darker as you get farther away from the light. I believe that's what it's changing. I may be wrong, but this is for spotlights. Tilt, once again, is changing it more vertically. That's what the tilt does. So let's get into some of this. I'm going to set as an infinite distance. I'm going to set the intensity as 1. We're going to keep it as 1. I'm going to keep the spot angle as 45. We're going to start off with spot angle 45 and see how that looks. And I'm going to set the tilt as 0. Keep this the same as well. The penumbra, like I said, the penumbra is not too important, but you can test it out if you want. It's not really important like that. So I'm going to drag this onto the scene, and I'm going to drag the spotlight directly on top of the green block. And let's see how that looks. You'll see that first of all, I can barely see anything. I can barely see anything because I put the spotlight around on top of it. So if I turn around now, you'll see that only thing I can see is this little bit of light. I can't see much. So let's start changing some things about this light. So I'm going to double click into the light. I'm going to change the distance. We're going to keep the distance as good. As 0. I'm going to change the intensity to actually 100. Let's see how the intensity of 100 looks. And I'm going to keep the spot angle as 0. We want it to be straight up. And the penumbra and the tilt can stay the same for now. I'm going to actually put it in front of the light and see how that looks. You really have to do a lot of testing with these lights, because once again, it's hard to visualize. Right now, I can still basically not see anything. And spotlights are kind of like that. They don't cover that much area. They don't really cover that much area. So that's kind of the disadvantage of using spotlights instead of just regular lights. So, but I will show you how to make a flashlight using these spotlights. I'm going to once again change this one more time. See if we can see anything, but I really can't see the spotlight at all. I'm previewing the scene right now. I cannot see the spotlight. So I'm going to show you a better way to use spotlights. One of the best ways to use spotlights is in making a flashlight. And a flashlight is a common thing in 3D games, especially horror games or scary games, the same thing. So I'm going to show you how to make a flashlight. Now, in order to make a flashlight, what we're going to be doing is creating this light. We're going to be creating this light at a certain distance every time we press space. So I'm going to go into untop scene events. I'm going to add a condition, go into other conditions, go into where it says keyboard and key pressed. I'm going to click into where it says space. So when space key is pressed, I'm going to put trigger once. We only want what we're about to do to trigger once. Going to put trigger once. When space key is pressed, I want to create an object. And the object that we're going to create, I'm going to click into light 3, and we want to create that object. So I'm going to put create an object. Now, where do we want to create it? I'm going to create it at the X position of the player, which means I'm going to first put player, then put X, and then put parentheses. And same thing for the Y. I'm going to put player first, then dot Y, which stands for the Y value, and then put parentheses. And now I'm going to hit OK. Now, when this light object, we've created a light object now when we press space. So let's see what happens. I'm going to press space. And when I press space, you'll see that nothing has even happened yet. Nothing has happened at all. And the reason why nothing has happened is because we have our light in a way. We have our light set up in a way where it's not really visible. So first of all, I'm going to set this light that's going to be created. I'm going to set this light. We're going to give it a different tilt, because once I get set, the tilt makes sure that we're vertically making the light move. So if we don't have a tilt at all, that means the light's kind of going into the ground. We can't see it at all. So I changed it to a tilt of 35 to see if that changes anything. If I press space, you'll still see that nothing has changed at the moment. And that's because we have to set a few more things. Now, first of all, I'm going to have another condition. I'm going to put Shift A. And we want to set some things that the light will always have. What I mean by that, the light will always have. Now, light 3, which is our spotlight, we want its angle to always be equal to the same angle as the player. So I'm going to put angle. I'm going to type in angle. And we want it to be equal to the same thing as the player. So we put player, and we want to access the player's angle. So we put player.angle, and of course parentheses. That's the first thing. We also want the light to follow the player even when we're moving. So I'm going to put, for the position, I'm going to click to light 3, type in position, and then put the player's X, the X position is where we want the light's X position to always be. And also the same thing, we want the Y position of the light to be equal to the Y position of the player. So if I put player.x and player.y here. And lastly, I want the Z order. Now, of course, if you already know a little bit about 3D, you'll know that, and when it comes to Pandoco's extension, the Z order controls how high an object goes. The higher the Z order, the higher the height of the object, the Y position, how we normally see the Y position. So I'm going to put, for light 3, I'm going to type in Z order. And we want the Z order to always be equal to the player's Z order. So I'm going to once again put player, and you can already predict it, dot Z order. And now I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to put preview now. Now if I press space, I'm going to go into full screen. You'll still see nothing. And that's because we have to change our parameters. Once again, it can be quite tedious trying to deal with these parameters of lights. It's hard to really know what's happening at all times. So I'm going to try to change a few things. So first of all, let's change the distance to 100. Because maybe we don't want it to be limitless. Maybe we don't want it to be limitless. Now I can't still see anything. We're going to keep testing out. And this is more about trial and error. This is a lot of trial and error here. So I'm going to put the spot angle of this light to be equal to 0. See what happens. I'm going to set the intensity as 100 just so we can have a higher chance of seeing it. We have to check out where this light even is. Still can't see a light. Still can't see a light. Okay, so here we have it. I did a little bit of some changing here. So what I did is change the angle of the light itself. So when I press space, you'll see that the more I press space, you'll see more, it gets brighter kind of. It gets brighter. And the reason why it's getting brighter is because we're stacking lights on top of each other. So it means the light was in the right position mainly, but I just had to change the intensity. So let me go change the intensity up to 10. I'm going to hit apply. And let's see if we can see the light when I press space now. Yeah, now when I press space, you'll see the light. Now, of course, if I move forward now, if I keep moving forward, you can see that I eventually run into my blocks. And you'll see that this is working like a flashlight now. This is working more like a flashlight. So let me try to put the tilt. Let's try to change the tilt so it can be a little bit higher. Let's change it to a tilt of 50 degrees. Positive 50 degrees. And let's see how that looks. Like, you have to do a lot of experimentation. And let's see how this looks now. I'm going to walk forward until I see my blocks. I see some of my blocks. I see my block right here. I know my other block would be to the right, so you have it right here. And like I said, this is a good way to create a flashlight. You'll see this is real lighting right here. There's a good way to create a flashlight feature in your game. From what the looks of it seem, tilt doesn't change the light too much from my experimentation. But you should want to experiment lights in different positions. You want to make sure that the lights, you want to try lights that are over objects, lights that are under objects. And that's what spotlights are good for. They're almost like point lights, but you have a little bit more customization. Now, one more thing I want to add with this flashlight. When space key is released, I want to delete the lights. So I'm going to simply put other actions. I'm going to go into keyboard, key press, and put when the space key is released, not pressed. I want to put when it's released. We want to simply just delete the third light, which is the spotlight. Once again, you can also do this with a point light when it comes to the flashlight. And just so the flashlight can have more range, I'm going to set the distance as 200 and the intensity as 15. And let's preview this one last time. I'm going to press space. And now I have to hold it out if I want to see it. So I'm going to walk forward. And you can already see that I can see these objects from much farther now. So that's how you create a basic flashlight using the advanced 3D lighting. And that's just overall how you use the advanced 3D lighting. Now, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss on any of my new tutorials. And if you have any questions about the tutorial, about any other things that you may want to see in the future, make sure to comment those down below. I also want to shout out to my members. I'm going to have all my members in the description, but I want to thank you to the member that I do have for the support. And you all can also become a member of the channel by supporting. It's simply just $0.99 a month. It just helps to support the channel so I can keep making tutorials and make sure they're of higher quality every time that I do make them. So you can become a member if you want to support. But I want to once again thank you all for watching. I hope you all got something from this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya.